Hello, friends. Chad McDole here. Had some technical difficulties last time. All right, so if you're on here, I like to talk about travel nursing. I like to talk about health and personal development. And today, I'd like to share a story and communicate what, when choosing your next travel agency, what would you like to look for? What questions should you ask? And what kind of resources should be provided as an asset to you when you choose your next travel agency? And I brought on a guest here, Ronnie Robinette, very experienced in this industry. And I'm going to talk about why she's so important to this conversation. And she's going to talk a little bit about her role. But travel nursing has exploded right now. I'm new to this industry, so I'm learning all the time. And it's exploding right now. And people that had not considered travel nursing in the past are now considering it because there is such a high need, because facilities are so understaffed and the pay is really stupid good. So people that hadn't considered in the past are considering it now. But they're walking into situations and scenarios that aren't ideal. And if you're in healthcare, you know that. But you know, people are looking into it because they want to make cash. They want to jump in and jump on board and take advantage of the opportunity, which I totally support. But it's not all about money all the time. And this is my goal, is to help you appreciate and understand the ways the different agencies can help and what they have to offer. And so Ronnie, if you would, just share a little bit about your background, and I'm going to go into the story and communicate what happened and what we accomplished and why that was important.
Hey, I am the nurse liaison for Summit. I'm also a recruiter. I was a travel nurse for almost 5 years, and then I've been recruiting and nurse liaison for about 3 years. And so typically as a nurse liaison, if you have a problem at the facility, or let's say you're having issues or the hospital has a complaint, like maybe you had a medication error or something like that, then that's my responsibility to contact you, and we'll go over the issue. And then I write up, whatever the response is to the hospital, whether that's, or it's always on your behalf. I'll always work on your behalf. But, we kind of tailor it to whether this is a complaint from the nurse or a complaint from the hospital.
Okay, awesome. So like you've heard, Ronnie's been a nurse. She's been a travel nurse. She's a recruiter. So she's seen all sides of this, and now she's our liaison in case something goes wrong and she needs to support you, the travel nurse, in the scenario you're in. So we'll talk about why it's important, and I'll give you a specific story. So I just placed a nurse at a facility. I'm not going to share names. I'm not going to even share the state she went to. But she went through a day and a half of orientation. This was her second day. And she was placed on the floor in the unit that she was placed in. Well, she was walking through the hallway, and she said she couldn't literally take a step without walking around or over a patient, is how she described it. She described maybe close to, numerous patients in the hallway. Let's just put it that way, okay? And so she was asked, in her words, and Ronnie, you're going to help me if my vocabulary is off. She was asked to screen patients' acuity because they needed to place sicker patients in the room and remove those patients from the room they're currently in there and put them in the hallway. She felt uncomfortable doing this because she felt like this was, number one, not her role legally, because if she was asked to screen a patient, she didn't feel like that was her responsibility. That was the responsibility of an MD, and she didn't want to be held accountable for that. She felt like she was putting her patients at risk. And ethically and morally and even legally, she felt like she was putting herself and her license at risk, and wanted to provide the best patient care for her patients. And so she was uncomfortable. And she explained this to me, and she called me and said, "Hey, Chad, I don't feel comfortable at this facility. I'd like to be removed. I feel like what they're asking me to do, I'm not comfortable with." So is that fair, Ronnie? Is that a fair assessment? And how would you describe that different? But
Yeah, no, you explained it really well. That is exactly what happened. They were asking her to look at the patients that she was assigned that were sick enough to be in a room initially, and decide who wasn't sick enough to be monitored or whatever. And these are patients that already have orders in, like you know, their heart rate's 160 and they need to be on the monitor. Well, you know, if I have 4 of those patients and they're asking me to pick which one, like they're all sick enough to be in the room. So that's kind of the situation that this nurse had. And then what I did was, you know, I discussed it with her, listened to her concerns, and then I researched what the Nurse Practice Act is in that state, because each state has a Nurse Practice Act. And then as far as this one goes, this state had a basically a chart for decision making, and it basically laid out like what the decision making process is, and had several questions like, is the nurse, as a nurse, are you responsible? Are you ready to be responsible for the outcome of this patient for the decision that you made? And so basically it was those types of questions. And if you answered no to any of those questions, then it's like, stop, like you're not, you know, this is against your Nurse Practice Act. So that's kind of how that went. And, you know, I feel just based on what our conversation was, and what they were asking her to do, that it was outside of her scope of practice.
Right.
So.
Right. And again, I want to reinforce here, the whole philosophy and reason behind this conversation and this story is not to throw the facility under the bus, because nurses are being placed in really difficult scenarios right now because of the environment, and lots of scenarios that we haven't seen before, because they're understaffed and we're overloaded with patients, and that was some of her concern, and she was wondering if there was other protocols for trying to move patients to other facilities with the ambulances, the traffic, and these are all things that unfortunately we're having to deal with in the industry. My point behind this whole conversation is, look, bad stuff's going to happen in nursing right now, and you're going to be overloaded, and places are going to be understaffed. This is the expectation. Everybody in healthcare knows that. However, if you're put in a scenario where you feel uncomfortable, this is why it's important that you need to have a recruiter, and you need to have an agency that has the resources and is willing to back you up and support you. Yep. And this is what I've heard from day one. Again, I'm new to this industry. I'm new to this business, this company, and I have never had a better professional experience than I've ever had in any industry, any company, any team I've ever been with, hands down. And I have been so impressed with the leadership here, the decisions we make, and the focus we have, and that's the nurse. You know, we're nurse-centric, and every decision we make is on their behalf. And when I called Ronnie for the first time, the first thing she said to me was, Chad, bottom line is we need to define if this is ethical and illegal, but if she doesn't feel safe, she's a priority. We need to take care of her. And that's who I want to be. That's how I want to represent my nurses. That's how I want my team to represent my nurses, and that's who we are. And you experienced some similar difficult scenarios when you were nursing. Talk about those, and did you have those resources with a nurse liaison? And did you ever experience that and utilize that?
So yes, I have had some difficult assignments. And no, I mean, I expressed my concerns to my recruiters. It was with 2 different agencies. They're large agencies in the industry, and they did not have resources as far as a nurse liaison goes to speak on my behalf. And now for like, I don't only address things when it's like at an end. It's nice for the nurse to be able to reach out to somebody, like, you know, after, you know, if this nurse had wanted to continue, then we could have addressed the issues, and then see if we could get any response from the facility. Because I have had instances where I have had to reach out to hospitals and they did change whatever policy it was, and the nurses stayed for their contract. So, you know, there are other things. This isn't nurse liaison, isn't like at the end of, you know, when you're at your wit's end and you can't take anymore. So just with us, it is nice. That is a very nice perk to have, because there are a lot of agencies out there that do not have that resource. And I would encourage anybody listening, like if you are working with another agency, not us, ask your recruiter, hey, if I have a problem on assignment, who is going to be there to help me and back me up? That is a clinical person that understands what's going on, because a lot of nurses don't realize this, but most recruiters have no medical background. So they don't understand the severity of issues most of the time.
And
So
that's the exact conversation I had with my nurse is, look, you need to help me understand what's going on. And in your eyes, what would be the alternative that would create a better scenario? And then I reached out to you, Ronnie, my nurse liaison, relying on your expertise in the environment to be able to give that feedback and determine the best course of action. And today, even in our sales meeting, our recruiter meeting, we talked about, okay, there are different scenarios. We can reach out to the charge nurse or management or supervisors. We can create a scenario that hopefully can improve the situation and the nurse stays. We also ask that it's a good practice to give 2 weeks notice. We talked about that. So knowing when you get in an uncomfortable environment, it's not just I'm leaving, I'm quitting, because there are implications. And if you're listening, give us a thumbs up. If you're a travel nursing, if you have travel nurse, give us a thumbs up, throw us some engagement. And Ronnie, so what, because we had her removed pretty immediately. And we did it. She was cleared, no strikes. So what does no strikes mean? And what are the implications if you are removed? What are some of the risks with?
So with us internally, the strike is, so we have a review board that meets. I am part of that review board, and it consists of a couple other recruiters, HR, a compliance person. So what we do is we look at the case and like we determine if the nurse had a legitimate reason to leave the assignment early, then most of the time they're not going to get a strike. And that's any safety concern, usually a family emergency. In an instant where you would get a strike would be if you were fired for performance issues. So if you have medication errors or some kind of practice errors. And we always get the nurse's side of the story before we make a decision, because we all know there are two sides to every story. And so what our job is as a review board is to sift through both sides of the information and decide, what should be the best course of action for this person. Now, usually if you do receive a strike, we just call it a strike, which is
What does that mean?
Almost like baseball, like you get 3 strikes and you're out. For us, it's like 2 strikes and you're out. So it's like you've had your chance, you've had a first chance, okay, and that strike just kind of puts a flag that says they've had an issue in the past, and so maybe we should look at what that problem was. Now with us, with our agency, we do provide the nurse with some type of remedial continuing education or something like that if it is a practice error. So we would also have that in their file as far as they got a strike for a medication error. They did take this, do this education, take a test. Here's the test that they passed, and now they're able to move forward with another assignment. So in my opinion, in order to do it that way, it does create some responsibility for the nurse. Say, hey, I did make an error, which, most of the time, when you make an error and it's an accident, it's not like you did it on purpose, but, I made an error. This is what I did to recoup myself basically. And I'm willing to do that, to put in the time to be able to continue to work with this company. Most agencies, if you are fired for a performance issue, you get a similar thing. Like they will give you a strike. I don't know if that's what they call it, but most of the time they don't give you any type of continuing education or anything like that. So in my opinion, I think that is a perk too, because let's say that we go through a vendor for a job. So a vendor is basically, it's basically an agency that manages a hospital's jobs, kind of like we as an agency manage nurses, they manage the jobs. So let's say you're at one of their facilities and you get canceled because you did make an error. Well, we want to submit you to another agency or another hospital that they manage. They're going to say, they were just fired for whatever. Why should we look at them again? And so we can provide them with that education and say, this is what we did to correct that error, and moving forward, we don't expect to have an issue.
Right.
So that is kind of the steps that we go through. Like I said, not all agencies do it that way. Some, if you get fired, you can't work for them again. And then some will
For that agency or for that vendor?
Vendor. Yeah. Yeah. And my major concern usually when we have these issues is with the vendor, because if you become a do not hire status with a vendor, your options are severely limited. Because, like, for example, one vendor may manage hundreds of hospitals. And so then if you're a do not hire within that vendor system, you aren't going to be able to work at any of those hospitals. And it doesn't matter if you go through us, go through another agency, anybody, because they all are going to have that information on file.
Right.
So it's going to be really hard for you. So, and that's part of my job as nurse liaison. If you do need to quit for safety issues or whatever, that's part of my job to go to bat for you so that they don't do that.
Get on that list, the do not hire list.
Yeah. And usually that can be avoided if you do get a notice. So 2-week notice, or some hospitals do require a 4-week notice. But typically 2-week is the norm. So usually that can be avoided that way. But in an instance like this nurse that we were just talking about, that, her concern was something that the nurse was expected to do every single shift. And so we needed to get her out of there quicker rather than later.
Right.
So, that's definitely something to consider when you are thinking about quitting, is the repercussions as far as being a do not hire with the vendor. Right.
Yeah, and that's what I want to reinforce, because Ronnie was talking about getting fired, but then there's also that other piece where we helped her get out of an environment where she felt unsafe, which she communicated, but there's still risk in both environments. So you need to know that. And when you choose your agency, it's important to know, do they have this as a resource?
Yeah.
And that's what I want to reinforce today, because there's lots of agencies that are just website driven, low overhead. There's giant agencies that don't have this resource. And I haven't even mentioned it. We're Summit Medical Staffing, and we're the fastest growing medium-sized agency in the country right now. And I feel so blessed and grateful to be a part of this group. They're amazing. But we're based out of Omaha, which is my understanding is basically where medical staffing is basically founded. It's a hotbed for the medical world, but that's irrelevant. But Summit Medical Staffing, and we have a person like Ronnie that's been in the trenches, who knows what you've been through, is there to protect you when things go bad. And those of you that are considering going into travel nursing, it is really good pay, and it's a great time to jump on board. But it's important to jump on board to be educated, and jump on board with an agency that will support you and has your back. Because you've all been on the boards, you've all been on the groups, you've heard the horror stories. The recruiter gets you placed and then he disappears and ghosts you, or they try to reduce your pay, or this or that. You hear all the things, and that's what I want to talk about on this channel. But one of them is, do you have a nurse liaison that can support you when things go bad? So, yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Ronnie. Is there anything that we didn't hit that you want to touch before we end this?
No, I don't think so. I just think, that's a great question when you're looking at agencies, is do you have that resource available? Because I can guarantee you pretty much you're going to want to utilize that resource at some point, especially right now. And if you don't have it, then, it's kind of like you're going to be fending for yourself almost.
Yeah.
So I would definitely.
And that's scary.
The top questions that you ask.
And that goes from payroll to compliance to nurse liaisons, everything, which again, I feel like we're nurse centric. We are just focused on them. So if you're looking to go into travel nursing, you have questions, reach out to me. You can find me on any social media channel. Reach out to Ronnie. We are happy and honored to help you. Check us out at Summit Medical Staffing, or summitmedstaff.com. That's our website, and we'd be happy to work with you. And we wish you the best. Make it a great day and be awesome. I appreciate your time, Ronnie. Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.